Okay, so I'm going to start talking about, I'm going to talk, as I said, for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I'm actually a little bit speechless in the sense, and I was thinking about this after Joseph asked me, that it's not an easy time to talk, because I don't want to be just theoretical or academic or be flippant. It's very deep, and we've all been literally been stabbed and wounded and scarred, and it's actually quite important that one doesn't become, as I say, too rational or too academic. It's all want to go and numb ourselves. That's one of the problems, that we live in a world where people just want to numb themselves. So I always think of the story, it's not a new story, but many, many years ago someone called me. There was an aunt of someone, her sister had passed away, and there were two young kids, and she called me and said, should they come for therapy? They were crying at the grave. And I said, no, they don't need therapy. They need to grieve. Talk in 3 months' time. But we live in an age where even kids, as soon as people have a bit of pain, we want to get rid of the pain. So I don't want tonight to be about trying to reassure you. I will be positive at the end, but I just want to say that it's okay to acknowledge that it's difficult, and it's okay to not have all the answers, and it's okay to sit with difficult feelings. That's part of the process. Where it becomes complicated, and when we talk about complicated grief, we talk about this, is when we stay stuck in it, or when it stops us from functioning. And it's often a little bit tricky to work out how to feel what we feel and yet still function well, and not let the feelings in acceptance and commitment therapy terms derail us, not let our feelings bully us and stop us from functioning well. But we also don't want to get into a state, as I said, where we're not feeling. So this is particularly difficult because it's very raw, very recent, and we've also had chronic stress or trauma, which I'll talk about the differences, since October the 7th. I think every Jew we've been living with, people have described it to me as almost like there's this black cloud that is hovering around all the time. People are feeling different, people are feeling weighty, dragging their feet. So we've had this, there's the one event, the actual attack, but then there's the chronic trauma of all the different things, the lies and being let down by other countries. And many people, in Australia have been completely shaken up by the reaction of non-Jews, and I know people who've left their jobs because they felt betrayed. One person who worked in a very, very high-level job, where her boss made some comment to her that she looked like she was in a tunnel, that kind of comments, and she left this high-level corporate job. So there are lots of ongoing stresses that we've been dealing with, and then, Saturday came along, Shabbos came along, and on our doorstep, this attack, which they're saying is not terrorism, but regardless, it's trauma. And then, of course, people are talking about it. That's okay. Hello. People are talking about it, which is ongoing trauma. Every time you talk about it, you relive it or you rethink about it. So I was just saying that it's a difficult time, and I don't want to sanitize everything and just rationalize it. It's important to make space for the difficult feelings and to be able to talk about them. And people have different feelings at different times. And that's the other thing, is that feelings come and go. And when you just allow them, when you observe them and allow them to come and go, they will move freely. When you try and get rid of them, they don't move freely, and they get a bit stuck. And when you repress them, which is different to suppress them, when you try and suppress them, they come out often in a different form, headaches or illness or other things. So it's about watching them. So we talk about noticing and naming your feelings and just letting them be free to come and go. Just you notice, they've got worse, they've got better, they're up, they're down. but it's not actually a hypervigilance that you're worried about your feelings. It's just noticing, oh, I'm feeling a bit sad now, and then just moving on and letting it to move freely. So that's a very important thing. We often stick our feelings. They get sticky when we get hypervigilant about them, and they also get sticky when we judge them. So when we have a feeling, let's say we have a moment where we are happy about something. Things are still going on, a member of your family gets engaged or something, and you feel very happy, and then you go, oh, look at me. The world's falling apart, people are dying, and how dare I be happy? And we judge ourselves, and we get, or the opposite, we feel sad, and we go, look at me, I'm such a wuss, and I'm such a coward, and I should be better. And so we actually we call it getting sticky, because the judgment actually prevents it from moving freely. So the idea is to notice and name feelings, but without strong judgments, without feeling bad that you're having the feeling. And it's a normal part of life that feelings come and go, and that's really important. And often what you're going through, other people aren't. So that the moment that you might be feeling very sad, someone else actually is going through one of their happy moments, and that's when judgment of others comes in. And I'm always interested to hear how we judge each other. How can you believe it? Like, so-and-so, what was one I heard the other day, so-and-so's son is in Gaza, and we had a poker night, and people were joking and laughing, and, and how dare they, kind of thing. So again, it's all about the judgment. So people have their happy moments and their sad moments, and that's okay. That's okay. The ideal, though, is not to get locked in. So I want to talk a little bit about anxiety and a lot about trauma. Anxiety stress is when there's a perceived overload. I can't cope with this, it's too much. And stress is a normal part of life. We have something going on, I've got a big project to do, and we have a moment of stress about it, but we can often, most of the time, work through that stress. And only again when it limits us in some way does it actually need treatment. Too much emphasis has been putting on stress and balance, but really we all live with stress, and it's not a bad thing. Erev Pesach, it's actually not a bad thing to wake up early and you're exhausted at the end of the day, but that's okay. It's a stressful day, that's life. And stress, that word actually comes from, it's an engineering term, where there was stress, a load is put onto like a metal bar or something, and they can measure the stress of the load and how much it can take. So when you have a truck, for example, I don't know other examples, I suppose scales are, but I know about trucks. The side of a truck will tell you 5-ton truck or 10-ton truck, and that's all that truck can carry, because they've measured the load, they've measured the stress of it. So stress is normal, and if you can make stress your friend, as long as, again, it's not derailing you and stopping you, it's fine. We live in a culture where everything is dramatic, and I've sort of become more and more vocal about these ideas, and it's important. If I teach you anything today, it's about the choices you can make about how you want to look at what's going on, because everything I'm going to say to you is based on a huge body of research, but there's also another body, some people might call it pseudo-research, but I wouldn't even go that far. That is different for various reasons, and we have a choice at which one we want to look at. So I'll come back to that in a minute. So anxiety involves a physiological response, and involves certain behaviors. So anxiety is a big one is when you ruminate, when you keep worrying about things and you go round and round in a circle. What's going to happen? What if? What does it mean? And you go down this rabbit hole. There are all these different expressions of what anxiety is, but very often it has a physiological response. Your heart is racing, you're sweating, you've lost your appetite, you feel nausea. You can even have tingling in your fingers and toes. You can have headaches. There are all kinds of physiological responses that go with it, and because we link it to the fight or flight response. Now, if you want to talk about Saturday afternoon, when people were running out of Westfield, that was an appropriate fight or flight response, when you have to just get the hell out of there, that you don't want to think, you're not rational. That's what we need fight or flight for. And it has a place, and it's not a bad thing. Your heart does need to pump faster, and you do need to breathe more shallowly, and you have all the blood goes into your legs so you can run, and that's appropriate. It's when you have those responses and it's not appropriate that it becomes debilitating. Now, trauma has become $1 billion industry. It's a word that only started being used in about 1982. It started when, until the Vietnam War, no one spoke about post-traumatic stress. They used to speak about shell shock. And I'm not saying those symptoms weren't the same, but suddenly in about 1982, there became this interest in post-traumatic stress in veterans, and trauma became part of everybody's language now. Now everyone has post-traumatic stress. I have people who come to me and, someone shouted at them and they have post-traumatic stress, and if anyone shouts at them, they're getting triggered. It's like a lot of these words, abuse, become part of our everyday language, and then they lose their meaning, really. What does it really mean? So a lot of the research that's been done about trauma is based on that kind of the work with the veterans. So there's a lot of information about this. So the person that I think is one of the world leaders in, his book is called The End of Trauma, and a lot of what I'm going to tell you is based on his work. His name is George Bonanno. But there's another book that I actually read this weekend. It's about children, but it's called Bad Therapy Why Therapy is Bad for Children. Hot off the press, Abigail Schreier. And she talks about this idea of everything's a trauma, everything's stressful, everything's anxiety-provoking, and she brings all the statistics, that we can measure it, how kids are more and more anxious, more and more medicated, but they're not getting better. And that's the problem, that's the whole thing, her thesis. If it's working, if you've got a medical model that works, your child is anxious, give them whatever the equivalent of Valium for them is, rush them off to therapy and they get better, good, you've got a model that works. But it isn't like that. More and more kids are getting sick, mentally unwell, and more of them are getting sicker. So their symptoms are getting more dramatic and worse. So it's not just anxiety, it's self-harming, it's food, eating disorders, suicide's a major, major issue, all these things. So the question is, a lot of people, including her, but researchers are going, why? What is going on? And a big part of what she talks about, and when she talks about why therapy is bad, certain type of therapy, she means psychotherapy. So she doesn't mean things like CBT, which is action-oriented. Because there's so much focus on feelings. And that's what I was saying at the beginning of today. It's all about everything a child does, how are you feeling about it? Do you want to do this? Is it okay with you? And this overemphasis of feelings, she feels, is making this fragile population. Because what I was saying earlier is feelings come and go. And if we do that ourselves, if every 5 minutes we're checking in, how am I feeling? Most of the time we don't feel so great. We have our happy moments, but on the whole, sometimes the truth is, this idea that we've got to be happy all the time isn't actually life. It doesn't mean we're unhappy, but a lot of the time we've got a pain over there, and we're irritated with that person, and we're frustrated, and we're a bit worried. If we actually tap in, and every 5 minutes, it's like often, back to trucks, but I often, you drive behind a truck and it says, how am I driving? And I thought, he's being observed. I wonder if he's aware of that. But if a person all the time is worried about how am I driving, it impacts your driving. And in fact, there's a lot of fascinating research on, I'm going to probably talk too long, observers actually affect experiments. So, When I did physics a few decades ago, they weren't sure whether light waves were waves or whether they were particles. But what the research now shows is it depends if they're being observed or not. So when someone says, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there, does it make a sound? The answer is no, because there's no eardrum to pick up the sound. The person being there is what makes a sound. If a tree falls, it might cause a vibration, but if there's no ear to pick it up, it doesn't make a sound. So the whole thing is the observer and the observed, and the interaction is very important. So if you are being observed, it will affect your performance. And similarly, if you're observing yourself all the time, it affects your performance. So you want to limit the amount of observation of your feelings. You want to be more action-oriented. You want to be involved in life. You want to be a contributor. You want to make space for feelings, but they shouldn't be your driving force, because feelings, we say feelings are not facts, but also, as I said, feelings come and go. So she gives a quote from her life. She says her son plays the violin, and I could relate because the violin teacher was a Russian, and my daughter had a Russian violin teacher who thought I was a terrible mother, because she told me that she used to lock her daughter in the room for hours to make her practice, and I wouldn't lock her in the room and make her practice. Anyway, this Russian teacher didn't seem as bad, but I know the culture, right? So she says the son didn't want to play, and Abigail, the author of the book, she's a psychologist. What's her first question? Well, how do you feel about it? What's going on for you, right? And the Russian teacher turned around and said, look, sometimes he's going to feel like playing, and sometimes he's not, but he needs to play. He needs to practice. And that sums it up, that sometimes we don't feel like doing it. And actually, it's a very Jewish idea. Sometimes you don't feel like making Pesach, or sometimes you don't feel like keeping Shabbos, or sometimes you don't feel like not gossiping, or all the things that we know. But we do it because it's the right thing to do. We don't just go with our feeling, I just really feel like destroying that person in that moment. We don't, because it's the right thing to do, even though we feel like it. So this idea that is we've got to feel and we've got to do, the idea is not to focus too much on the feelings and not to let them dictate what you are actually going to do. So what Bonanno has shown, and I'll just tell you because his research is so important. In the 1990s, he did research on grief. And what he thought is that people would do much worse. And I remember many years ago when I lost my father, people came to me and they said, you never get over it. And I thought, well, my parents were okay, and other people seem okay, but she told me I'm never going to get over it. And people talk like that. And that's what he thought. So he did his PhD on grief, and he found that 85% of people got over it. Some people doesn't bother them, and about 12% of people have chronic grief, and the rest have what he calls this resilience trajectory, where it takes a while. If we talk about the Jewish way of life, it can take a year, it can take a while, but then you can get on with your life. So he was around, and he was a professor when 9/11 happened, and he was on George Bush's team, and they set up, at the cost of billions of dollars, counseling centers all over, expecting people in New York to be traumatized. And what he found was exactly the same as the grief. He found there were some people. Hello, welcome.
Sorry.
That's okay. We're being very casual. Some people did have ongoing trauma, the 12%. Some people seemed to fly through it, but the majority went through a few months where they were affected. Most of them, by the way, did not access counseling, which was the other thing, because when you're in that state of trauma, they did not feel the need for that. What they needed was more practical things, which is why trauma counseling has changed now. If someone's house burns down, we don't go and sit with them about their feelings. We go, okay, we'll find you accommodation, we'll give you food. And if in 3 months you still need to talk about it, they've changed it completely. So he actually found that was exactly the same. And then he did many crises. He did the Auckland earthquake. He did in Peru when the volcanoes erupted, like big stuff on thousands of people in many different countries. And what him and his researchers found was exactly the same, that 85% of people recover from trauma. And that's why his book is called The End of Trauma. He also talks about a term, anti-fragility, and there's a guy, I think he's a Russian, and I can't remember his name, Natan someone, who termed the coin in 2016 anti-fragility, based on the metal rod I was telling you about. That in fact, when there's an extra load on in a certain position of steel, it actually strengthens it. And more we have this idea that you can come out stronger. Don't be afraid of the stress. It can make you stronger. So it's not because I'm saying this. This is what the research is showing. I don't want to spend too much time on the other, but you should know it is a billion-dollar industry where people are walking around going, and I heard someone even the other day, but it's based on what professionals are saying, you never recover from trauma, you'll never be the same, everybody's traumatized, nobody's normal, all those things.
Can I
Sure, please.
What does it mean to come out of trauma? Like, what would that look like?
It's a very good question. I don't know what it exactly means when people use it, because the science I follow and the models I follow, it's you can live with it very successfully. It can all be part of you. So we talk about, like with acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about looking, not being reliving the event, but observing the event, and the expression they use is from behind your eyes. So if you have a triggering event, if any of you were there and you're near Westfield, and you close your eyes, instead of reliving it as if you're now there again, you observe it, and just if it makes sense, from behind your eyes. And so sometimes you will have an event that is always there, but it's not re-triggering you, and you're able to make space with it, and sometimes you'll still cry about it. So I'm not convinced that you can move out of it and it's never there, but I know it doesn't have to control you.
What about the EMDR?
Excellent.
So how would that for coming out of trauma?
It's the same. Well, it's a different technique, but I think
And what does it stand for?
EMDR is eye movement,
Desensitization.
desensitization, reprogramming. So what they do is, what they found is that you can't, I'm putting it very simplistically, it's a bit more complicated than this, but through eye movements, you relive a traumatic event, but they get you to move your eyes, and that movement and shifting from left brain to right brain helps unwire that neuron in your brain.
But it's a processing of the memory over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So by doing this repetitive processing, it's shifting the emotional trauma to a, as you say, the state of just, it's been there, we've done that, but there's no more emotional
Correct.
connection to it.
Correct.
But you still have to process it over and over again, relive in EMDR you're going to relive the trauma over and over and over again. What's the difference between doing that, reliving the trauma over and over again, versus behind the eyes of observing?
No, well, you would still do that a number of times, but it would be limited. Like EMDR is normally around 12 sessions. So it's not like when I trained in psychoanalysis, it was 7 years, 5 days a week was the therapy. And if you were, if you worked in London, you had 5 patients because you were seeing them every single day. It was but the philosophy was, I'll come back to you in a minute, was that you could resolve all issues. So psychoanalysts believed that if you come often enough and long enough, you will resolve all issues. And then after maybe 50 years, people were going, no, maybe we should try other things as well. And I'm not dissing anything, but the idea is that there are other ways to resolve it, and sometimes you can't resolve something. You make peace with it, or you find a way of living with it, or sometimes it gets you down, but again, it doesn't derail your whole life. So the difference again with EMDR is that it will be 12 sessions or maximum 15 sessions, and each time you talk about it, you are diminishing its effect on you, which is different to the old way they would do trauma counseling, would be not to move your eyes or diminish it. So each time you would talk about it, it would increase its effect on you. So they found, for example, like with sexual abuse clients, they would get more and more triggered because they weren't undoing. You see, when you're talking about EMDR or ACT, you're undoing it. There, it's more about reliving and reliving and reliving, and it's like any habit gets more and more and more. So it had the opposite effect. Yeah. So
it's really about detaching yourself from the memory, emotionally from the memory, observing. You're sort of semi-detached in a way. It's observing it from a distance.
Yeah, you realize. So, for example, with ACT, what we do, I'm much more familiar with ACT. I know MDR, but I'm not. Is you'll say to people, where are you sitting, and you make people feel safe. You're in this room, and you're sitting in the chair, and you make them very present, and that can be a safe spot. And then from the safe spot, they observe it, as opposed to just talking about it as if they're in it. So, first of all, learning deep relaxation, and then having a safe spot is then the way that you can process it. And I do think there are many people that get through a lot of things and move on and do actually forget about things. So I spoke at dinner a while ago, and someone was very upset with me because she asked me whether I thought, I can't remember what the topic was now actually, the actual title, maybe someone here remembers. But the question was, do I think that Holocaust survivors would have done better with years? She's an analyst, I discovered afterwards, with years of it. And I said, I'm not sure. She's a psychoanalyst.
Do better with what?
So she felt that Holocaust survivors, if they'd had psychoanalysis, they would have coped much better afterwards. Yeah.
How would you know?
Exactly. Thank you. That's what I said. I said, I really don't know, but based on all the things I'm saying now, is that one of the things that the Holocaust survivors, many of them do, and I'm totally generalizing, is what we call suppression, not repression. And there's now research like Bessel van der Kolk, who talks about coping with trauma, and this even Abigail talks about the 5 things that help with coping, and one of them is suppression. So sometimes it's actually better not to talk about something and to suppress. You know it's there, but not to keep stirring it up.
What's the difference between repression and suppression?
Repression is you don't know it's there. It's like,
So it's an unconscious.
so completely repressed memories never happened to me. Suppression is, yeah, I did live through the Holocaust, it was awful, but I don't think about it very much. I consciously push it down. So,
Generally, on a whole, didn't they cope very well?
well,
They
that's,
went on to actually cope very well, and most of them made very successful lives. for
that's
themselves.
right. That's
Because
right.
they're repressed, not suppressed.
Oh, they were
No,
also
because they
collective.
suppressed. Many of them suppressed, yeah.
Not repressed.
They
Yeah.
were also collective. They had a collective memory, so it made it normal in a way
Yes, amongst themselves.
amongst themselves.
But what I'm curious about is these academics like Bessel van der
Yeah.
and etc. What you were saying, have these people actually encountered physical traumatic experiences in order to write about them, as opposed to objectively viewing and citing someone and saying, I'm going to analyse you, you have trauma, so I'm going to take the person who has the trauma as opposed to the academic who sits back and analyses, researches. It's like a surgeon kind of cutting into skin, but you can't actually feel what you're cutting into. And do you know what does anyone understand what I'm saying? Like, on the one hand, you're an academic, you're researching,
But have you actually
but
felt
have you
it
actually
yourself?
felt it yourself?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing to consider and look into, because unless you have lived experience, and every experience will be different, of course, because no 2 experiences will be the same. How can you actually advise something that is so horrific? I mean, if you take something like the Holocaust, like you were saying, a lot of the people who came out, they married people who were in camps together. They had collective experience. No one else could relate. Like, how can you put me with someone who's been in a concentration camp from Auschwitz? I wouldn't have a clue, and who am I? Like, tell me to shut up with pleasure. I had an aunt who used to walk around when I was little. I still have memories, showing me her number when I was like 5 years old, walking around like this all the time. It's still ingrained in me. And she was marked for life. It was, and the only person who could actually relate to her, or kind of relate to whatever she went to, was for someone else who went through a camp, and they married. So how do you actually, I don't know, not distinguish, but really treat someone, or if you haven't been through what they have been through, you're looking like a scientist from a scientific point of view. I mean, obviously you need analysis, you need objectivity, you need research. You don't want to you go through the trauma, because otherwise you can't write, and but how do you actually do that.
Well, someone,
anecdotally.
all these people, I mean, they run a huge department where they have clinics and they work with people, and it's all measured, so it's not on an individual level. There always are individual cases, but what they will do, for example, if he went to Peru, they would straight after the event, and I think the numbers were close, like 500,000 people were affected. They then go around and they do assessments, like questionnaires, which are what we call valid and reliable assessments. And then they know what they put in. So they might say, okay, we put in housing, or we put in counselling, whatever they put in. And then and also they have the people's, and then they would look at them. So we're talking about a huge number of people 3 months later, and they see who did better. And they might say, well, the people who actually got food and clothing and that did better than the people who were given counselling. Not that they deliberately control groups, but so they have mass data of what works for people. Like when they saw after 9/11, so a few people went for counselling, they went knocking on doors in Manhattan and asked them, people who lived within 5 kilometres, and said, why haven't you come to the counselling centres? What has helped you? They're not trying to relate in that way. We're not talking about psychoanalysis. And they interviewed thousands of people who lived very close. And then they interviewed them 10 kilometres, and they wanted to see if there was a difference. And then 15 kilometres. So they try and look at different variables to see what makes a difference. Why did they cope better than that?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's why sorry?
Saying the people who didn't go to therapy felt better?
No, I'm not saying that. I didn't see that. What they were saying is very few people took it up. They expected millions of people to go to these counselling centres.
It's New Yorkers. It's the way they are. They
So-
don't talk about their feelings.
Does anyone remember?
Well, he's done it enough times in different things, like New Zealand, Peru. I can't remember the other places. But the idea being, what I wanted to say is that there are ways of. So I always want to say, let me talk to us, me and you, sitting here. Is we're in a storm, and we want to drop an anchor. Imagine like you're a little boat out at sea, and you need to drop an anchor, which keeps you stable. You're still rocky, but it's a way of centering yourself to get through the storm, to get to the other side. Exactly what it's going to look like, exactly. So you also need to find what works for you. Find what works for you. Different people. So what I love about Bessel van der Kolk's work is he talks about things like movement and massage. He says not everybody wants to talk. Some people, through trauma, their vocal center actually shuts down. So what he promotes is things like, and I've seen amazing results from things like neurofeedback. I think he mentions yoga. So some people, again, there was like this massive car pileup in Toronto. He talks about 87 cars, which affected all these people. And then they follow people and say, what did you use? And they measure them and they see what worked for people. And so he has on his website, if you've got any type of therapy that's not in the medical model and you would like, he will research it to see if it has efficacy. Because he says there are things there that the medical model doesn't value, but actually is very valuable. Mm-hmm. So one thing he spoke about which really struck me, he spoke about movement and prayer, and he said in the old days, people would go, he used the word cathedrals, would go to cathedrals if there was like an attack or an avalanche or something. And he said even non-believers, just being with other people and moving and swaying, and I thought about in Shul's Howie Daven, is very therapeutic.
October 7th, we were dancing with the Torah.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is a little bit like that MDR, the tapping, you know.
'Cause it's
That's
it
right.
might be a
Yeah.
celebration of
Yeah. So, like come on Friday night at 5:30, but it's actually, as he's saying, it's not just talking therapy. And that's what Abigail Schreier book. She's not saying all therapy is bad, but she's saying the bad therapy is this ongoing focus on your feelings. Do other things that can also help
You're
you.
saying feel it, but don't get stuck in it.
That's right.
It's important to feel it. So my question is, this is good for adults who are able to feel a feeling. For a child, you know the feeling charts for children. First of all, I wonder if you would promote that or endorse it. But two, you said not to ask the children constantly how you're feeling, but how else would we teach them to know how to associate a feeling? Like my kid doesn't know necessarily that they're mad or they're angry or they're jealous this or if they're hungry or if they're tired. Wouldn't
So
it
that's
really-
when it's appropriate. So there are times that you need to educate them.
So
But I'll
should
give
not
you-
constantly say how you
Exactly.
feel. But if
If they don't want to eat, dinner, it's not like, oh, you poor thing, what are you feeling about dinner? And it's that, do you want a bath now?
okay,
So
you're pulling back from the people who have gone to.
No, it's
to
the
That's
poor-
what she
the
said,
poor
correct.
people in Africa.
It
Correct.
just has to be with the normal.
That's right.
But is it not just about I think, to me, feelings are instinctive, okay? We're born with this primitive memory of stuff, and it's an instinctive thing to feel pain, to feel sadness, to be angry. First of all, it's allowing them to feel sadness, angry, and whatever, frustration. It's more about the management of it. And I think, if a child is feeling angry, you feel angry, but don't go bash up the house. I think that's really where it comes into. I think the kid
Your
ought to...
feelings are safe here, and you can hit everyone.
That's right.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, the kid is allowed, the child, adults are allowed to feel these feelings. It's the behaviour behind the feelings that's
So
involved.
I actually have a fear around that because I tell my kids it's okay to be angry, and I see that you're angry, and it's okay to tell me about it, but you can't yell at me.
Yeah.
And I feel like, but sometimes I'm worried I'm shutting them down because I know when somebody's angry, they speak in a bit of an elevated voice, and it's part of being angry. But I don't like it. I don't like when my child yells at me. So, what would be the appropriate?
Okay, so this is where, now remember what I spoke about at Bina. Rabbi Garari spoke about bad feelings and good feelings. And so him and I were on a panel and we had a debate about it. And what he was saying is anger is a bad feeling. From a Jewish point of view, it's a bad feeling. So where we differed is I was saying the feeling is okay, but it's not something that you want to nurture. From a Jewish point of view, anger is idol worship. Anger is destructive. Anger is, there's so much damage control you've got to do afterwards. So we were talking about things like jealousy and anger. I think those were the main ones. That it's not something that one should say it's really okay. You can have them, but part of our work from a Jewish point of view is to actually work not to be that way. The Rambam, that was his will to his son. His whole will and testament to his son, the letter for the ages, is all about if you want a good life, work on not being angry.
Oh, wow.
That's his will and testament to his son, yeah.
Have any of you guys?
I mean, his son had a major anger issue.
Maybe. Well, he didn't get money in the inheritance. So.
Anger is just that surface feeling.
Yeah.
If one just takes it a little deeper and deeper, then you get really down to what's really going on. There's pain, there's shame, there's embarrassment, whatever it is that's just happened for that poor kid or that adult, whatever it is. I think anger is just that initial response, usually from an ego type space, yes. But if one really wants to,
That's right.
take
So
the ego
we
away,
talk about
you can
anger as
delve
being
into the
a
real-
warning light. So when you feel it, that's right. Then you can go deep and go, why am I feeling angry and what needs to be addressed,
But no
as
one
opposed to
does that.
pushing it outside. Yeah,
It's hard to do that.
yeah. And the thing about anger is that, and it's actually similar to what I was saying, sort of like trauma. And I can say this because I've experienced it. So in the late 60s, Rogers came along all about feelings, and then there was a big movement in the 70s about self-esteem and about being able to express yourself. And we used to run groups, I kid you not, where we'd promote anger. And the example I always give was people would bring a pillow and you'd write a person you were angry with, very often your mother-in-law, your mother or something, your sister-in-law, and give people knives and they would stab the pillow.
Oh, wow.
And the idea was that if they got very angry on this pillow, on their mother-in-law, whatever, it will go. But the opposite happened because you develop a habit. We have never lived in a more angry and violent. That thinking was so bad and so anti-Torah, which is manage your anger. Today, anyone's angry over everything. A riot breaks out. I don't even know what the riot the other night was about. I'm still trying to work out why 40-something policemen were injured.
It was because they wanted to lynch the staffer, the attacker.
Yeah. And then,
But
were
the
people
police
not
were
from
there
the
protecting
Syrian
their
community.
were they not from there?
No,
Yeah.
they weren't
Okay.
from
They
their
weren't
community.
Assyrians.
They weren't from
You know, that,
they came from outer west. They came from
Unbelievable.
areas
What were they
around.
angry about?
Doesn't it also make a difference as to how you experience the trauma? I mean, I worked for Grenoble Heim in Chicago, and what he said was, and I know he's quite contentious character.
but wow, what a privilege.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
What he believed, what he said was that when they had, like, in the concentration camp, when they had roll call and that, the women would hold each other, or they'd have some contact with each other, whereas the men
That's a good point.
You said
And-
this.
Grenoble. And the
He was a very famous psychologist.
and so that they came out of it experiencing different.
He's probably a neo-Freudian, I think. Yeah.
Yes, he was an so it made a difference, you know, if you're a man or woman, what you.
So that's a very important part, is to actually be with people and to not isolate yourself. That's a huge thing. I think, again, you know, when I run my groups, I always, at the end of the day, we need to put, as I said, we have a choice. Which channel do you want to watch? Which body of research do you want to follow? I'm passionate about the end of trauma and believing. And one of the reasons that I actually, I don't think it's the only reason, but I'll tell you something that had a big impact. Maybe not so many years ago, there was an Insight, Insight on SBS. And they had a show on childbirth. If any of you saw it. And you would think that childbirth was the most, and I'm not saying it's not difficult, but the biggest trauma. These women that they got on board was speaking about childbirth, that I tell you, if I hadn't had my kids, I don't think I would have. I was like, the way they described it, and I thought, I don't think God would have created a world where, like, parents die and you never get over it, where you have a baby and you never get over it. It doesn't make sense. And so there has to be a different way of looking at it, because birth and death are so much part of life. We have to be able, I'm not talking about traumatic death, of course, but I'm talking about bearing a parent when you're an adult is a normal part of life. It's very, very sad. But this idea that you'll never get over it doesn't help you. And, you talk about individuals, and you're right, you cannot tell other people. You don't know what they went through. But there are a lot of, what's very helpful, I find, is reading stories of what people have gone through.
Yeah, I was just thinking of, is anyone familiar with the work from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning? That is an unbelievable book from a psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, and all his work was lost. Can you imagine losing your work, your life's work as a psychiatrist? But combining, being from that profession, going through the camps and actually writing about a book, then you have someone who has lived experience of real horrific trauma, and you have the scientific background for the medicinal background hand in hand with his life's work from like a sociological point of view as well. And you can read his work in his book, and that actually resonated quite well for me, because it's taken from someone who's, not only is he coming from that background, it's got the qualifications.
So have you read Edith Eger's book?
I was
No.
thinking about
Choice.
that one when you
Choice.
started
Choice is
talking.
brilliant.
I the
Yeah,
same
that
thing.
was
Now,
very
she's
helpful.
92
Choice.
now, and she also survived the Holocaust.
The choice, okay.
The
She was
choice
a
and the
college
gift.
graduate, yeah.
Incredible. Now, I'm glad.
Champs with them.
Yeah.
The choice.
That's right.
Now, she can say this, I can't, so I can say it in her name. She's 92, living somewhere in California, very nicely, world famous,
Embrace the
incredible.
impossible.
And she says, I would never be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through that. She's not saying I wanted to. She's not saying I chose it. But she realizes, and that's why her second book is called The Gift. You can never say someone else who's going through a trauma. You'll see one day it's the best thing that happened to you. It's a very personal thing. You've got it. But when it's yourself, if you can step out of yourself and go, if that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be who I am today. So that's a very important thing, is to realize, to find meaning, and that's Viktor Frankl. So I don't agree with Maslow's hierarchy, which starts with survival first and then meaning and actualization at the top. When a person has meaning, you can cope with a lot more. So we're in a shul, and I can say this, tap into meaning, tap into having a bigger picture. Because when you think there's no meaning and it's random, it's much, much harder. He says it doesn't have to be religious. He says his meaning was to finish his work, right, to rewrite it. And he was determined to get out. Other people in the Holocaust he speaks about, well, their meaning was to find their family again. They were determined to find. So it doesn't have to be religious. But if we can find meaning in these events, that's a huge thing. If we can find purpose, that's really a huge thing.
Because that's going forward.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
But it's also during the camps, it's having meaning in the day, that tomorrow's going to be a better day. The ones that didn't survive, or the ones that struggled with survival, were the ones that didn't want to wake up the next morning because it's another bad day. But going to sleep at night thinking today's finished, it wasn't great, but tomorrow's going to be better, or those are the ones that had that survival, that seemed to survive. Because that's where the choice comes and you can choose.
Yeah.
And the second one is the gift. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
gift.
And I think she's got in that 10 or 12 things, particular things you can learn. But the choice, you learn about how there were times she wanted to give up, but it's a choice. And The Happiest Man in the World, he also wrote that book.
Oh, yeah.
He says the same thing. His son was born and he made a choice, I'm going to be happy. So these are the people that should inspire us, not the people who go, you're damaged, you're never going to be normal. The other book that I recommend is Lee Sales' book called An Ordinary Day.
Oh, okay.
She, you know who she is? She used to do the 7:30 on ABC. And she went and interviewed people that had terrific traumas that, like one of them I remember was the Port Arthur massacre. This father who lost his wife and 2 children. And she interviewed them like 20 years later. And all of them had got through. I'm not saying they were all happy all the time, but the strength, and the guy in Threadbow, what was his name?
Stuart Diver.
Stuart Diver. And then he got remarried, his wife died at 42 from his second wife, you know. And he's like, I'm all right, mate, you know, somehow you can get through. We can get through, and we need to strengthen each other to get through. That's very, very important.
So, children, I don't know who anyone's here, but I have 4 adult children. They're still my children, but they're adults, right? So, they're looking how their parents are coping. And so the children they're in their 30s, but they're my children, and we're their parents.
Yeah.
And I find modelling, they're looking at us. I know they're looking at us. Like the first thing, I knew my kids would see this thing Saturday night, that they'd see Bonner Junction, Westfield. So the first thing I wrote to them Saturday night, was still Saturday in New York, so I knew they'd open up. I said, there's been an incident in Bonner Junction, Westfield, but we're okay. So, my parents are okay. And then, like, they're watching, so the way we act and react, they're watching, they're observing. And I say to my kids, and so there's Bonner Junction, which I believe, and what I've heard, was not racially motivated. That was Saturday. And Monday, they're saying it was racially motivated. No, Monday. So it was Saturday and Monday, and it's only Wednesday. It seems like a year ago. But there's 2 events, right? One says they're not racially motivated, and the second one on Monday, they said they were. And I say to my kids, the more they try to cancel us, the more we show up. So we show up to shul, we show up to the Seder, we show up, I'm not a rally person, but you can show up to the rally. That's the messaging I'm giving my kids, at least since October the 7th, or, I'll speak to them tomorrow. Oh, I went to talk with Renee and it was about resilience. So even children can be 3, but they can also be 30. And I just find modelling how we respond and react is giving them tools.
But it's not only children. There's actually what is the Hasidic expression when you are a role model for others? Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
A living example.
Yeah. And there is a concept about being a living example, of to be aware, Dennis Prager says that happiness is a behavior, it's not a feeling. and we have a responsibility to be happy around other people. We, being a Dub Machai, there is a responsibility to each other, because stress, anxiety, trauma is also very contagious. And one has to be careful. It's very easy to undo people of what we do, not even our kids, and to contain ourselves. Again, we need to have a space where we don't have to be contained and when we are held, but to be aware of our impact on others. The other thing is, to think action is very, very important. So the one thing that came out a lot in the beginning, and I love the idea that we're all in the army. Everybody has got a particular role they can fulfill. And when people feel it is, whether it's donating money or making sandwiches or whatever it is that people are doing where they feel they're contributing in some way. And it's been quite interesting for me because quite a few of my patients have found ways to feel that they're contributing to the war effort, linked to their careers or linked to their families. It's fascinating. And once they have that, you feel empowered because you're in the army, right? You're doing something.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. But I wanted to mention something else. It reminded me of something. If you read Holocaust survivors, especially survivor books, especially the ones about rabbis or from people, you'll read about, and I was thinking about this today, cleaning for Pesach. They would be starving, but they would give up scraps of bread to get a potato for Pesach so they wouldn't have chometz. Halakhically, I'm sure they didn't, the idea of keeping that mitzvah, what it meant to them. And that's something that I've noticed as well, how people are so proudly Jewish since October the 7th. Someone said to me this week that she's finding all her friends are becoming more religious. I didn't explore what that meant, but there's definitely that feeling of doing that. And all these things are therapeutic. They can help us drop an anchor. They're not the whole answer. And sometimes, as I say, they'll work and sometimes they won't. But tap into all the resources that we have. There was a terrible tragedy in South Africa many years ago. And a friend of ours lost their son of 16 in a terrible accident. And I'll never forget going to the Shiva. And the father said he's never been more grateful for Torah and mitzvahs, because if he didn't have to get up for Shachris with the minyan in the morning, he would not have got up. And if he didn't have to be with people during the day, he wouldn't have. And he found that the structure, and just whether he felt it or not, he knew he just did, but the action and all the things that are brought with it, he said, is what got him through. So think about things like that. Not only not isolating yourself and mixing with people, but if you enjoy shul, come to shul. If you want to do something extra, action is very, very therapeutic. So there are so many things we can tap into. But back to how I started, is that there is a trajectory. We're not going to get there straight away, and we are going to have some really difficult days and moments. And that's okay. But even while we're going through it, to think about, how do I drop an anchor? What will help me get through this difficult day? Not to get rid of it necessarily, but just so that I have a sense of self, just so that I can sort of feel some center, some stability, some core that is going to get me through.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
So with what happened on Saturday, personally for my daughter, who's only 12 years old, she's so traumatized by it. Like the junction, hanging out with her friends, being there without the parent, it's just kind of what they've started doing. It's a safe space. It's what she hasn't left home since Saturday.
Well, she's there.
She wasn't there, but it's her place. It's just where they go, after school. Mum, I'm going to the junction, and it's and it got to a point where it was like, okay, you're at an age where I trust you. You know the rules. You'd be always together. La la la, whatever it is. There's an anxiety around it. So, how does one, in an age-appropriate way, try and help your children in those age groups to cope? And then Monday night happened, and all of a sudden we get this message through Mariah and CHG, and there's a video circulating, just tell your kids not to watch or whatever, and before I could even go and have a discussion with her, don't watch anything, don't see anything if you know, she's saying, Mum, there's been another stabbing.
She put it on
How do
WhatsApp.
you know?
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
What
Through
you say.
Snapchat, a friend, a
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
And it was like, you're safe, you're at home, I'm not too sure it's just happened. With Saturday, I did very much go on, I told her, I said, this person was very sick. Obviously being Jewish, October 7th, being a Mariah, there's a lot of vulnerability and anxiety around that anyway. But then for this to happen on Saturday, I guess as a child you think it's attacking you. You think it's because you're Jewish, you know, like that was her first thing. So then it was explaining, no, this person was really sick and unwell. But then it's helping her get out there again, to feel safe, to actually, you're safe. You will be okay, you are safe, but I don't know that. I'm
Yes.
like, I don't know that. I'm
Yeah.
telling her a lie. Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make her feel better. I'm not
So
dismissing
reassurance
it, but
generally
kinda
doesn't, yeah.
Like, it's not helping.
I know.
So
a real,
how-
Or maybe going back to Bondi with her when it opens
But
up
that's
again.
what I thought. I actually did say to her today, maybe we should go and lay some flowers and go to where
That's
everyone's going, and I'm not going there. So she's very resistant. So should I push that to go there?
So
and
I
be
would
there
say,
with
I sort of feel that like for 2 weeks is a window that if she doesn't want to go anywhere, she doesn't have to go anywhere. I wouldn't push her. After about 2 weeks,
Anywhere or go to the junction?
either. If she wants to stay
She
home,
feels safe.
yeah. I would be okay with it. I would say after about 2 weeks, then then if she's still like, which is possible she won't be, you then do what Bernice is saying is you have sorry, Robin. Oh, that's right. So I wasn't completely off. Okay. Sorry. Gee, I thought, where did that come from? Then you set up an exposure ladder and you do it very gently. So you then go you might not go all the way to the junction. You might just drive and then walk like a few blocks away, and she can see it, but you don't have to go in. And then the next day you go a bit closer and you see it, and then so you can do a very, very slow exposure ladder. But the message is we will go back. Reassurance never works. What you say is something like, we have been told that we're safe. You give her the facts, but I can understand you don't feel safe, and it'll take time to build trust. And the only way we're going to build trust is if we keep going back very slowly, and you notice when she is more trusting, and then you reinforce that. Did you notice today you did that? But for now, you can't guarantee it. You rather give her, this is what needs to happen to build more trust.
And I'm sure the junction will also do things to make it safer.
Yeah.
We don't know. So, but how do they manage that? There's so many people.
Oh, you're saying like security?
She'll probably see
Yeah.
There's more.
that people are all being
I have a
vigilant.
question,
It's kind of like they're like,
Yeah.
In addition to what she was saying, so what I'm worried about is my wife or just a general sense of anxiety that a lot of people have now. Oh, the junction isn't safe anymore. Or my wife said today, she said, when I'm shopping malls now, I'm looking over my shoulder all the time. And I feel really, the way I've rationalized this whole thing is like, this thing is a 1 in 20 year event. So statistically, there's a certain amount of risk that we accept in everything that we do. Going into a car, going into a plane, it's a very low probability we accept that risk. So statistically, this stabbing attack is a 1 in 20 year event. It's happened, very unlikely that it's going to happen again in the near future. So yes, be vigilant, look around, but we don't need to always be looking over our shoulder. I'm just, is that a way to tell people who are, kind of really high?
Well, again, I think in the beginning most people will be like that, but with time it'll decrease. But the other thing,
Rationalize, or is that not a good strategy?
no, that is good. That's a CBT method of statistically, it's very unlikely it'll happen again. So that's one way of doing it, absolutely. The other thing that works very well is what we used to do with crisis intervention, because in Johannesburg there was a time when the kids would come to school and every weekend there was somebody had been stabbed or shot or killed, and there was a lot of trauma work that we used to do. And one of the things was to have a plan. So that's the other thing. So again, rather than saying it'll be okay, let's talk about it. It's unlikely, it's 1 in a million chance, but what would be a plan that we can do? And when people have a plan, that's depending on who the child is, let's have a plan. So it might be that I'll come with you, or it might be who will you call, or it might be carry pepper spray with you so you can do something. Often having something concrete like that is very good. Okay. Knuckle dusters, are they?
What about Krav Maga?
Teach them how
Yeah,
to
so
run.
that was my next point. And the other thing is actually again teach something like Krav Maga. How do you pronounce it?
Krav Maga.
Yeah, it's like self-protection methods.
Israeli defense.
Yeah, but it could be
there's a
anything,
place to
judo
go.
or whatever. So rather than going, let's avoid and be fearful, let's develop strategies. Whatever the equivalent of pepper sprays, you can just take perfume out. You can be your little secret.
true.
What's the strongest perfume? Let's go and choose it. And let's make sure how big the squirt, make a bit of a game, how big the squirt is.
No,
And have it ready. And then the second thing is to learn some moves if somebody is actually going to do anything, so that you can protect yourself. And then a plan. Do you run? What would you do? Who would you call? And all of that. And that is the best you can do.
Yeah.
And that's what we also need to have in our own heads, rather than avoiding to develop strategies if we get there, what we need to do.
Where did the 2 weeks? Tell me more about the 2 weeks. Is it a statistical thing, or what's?
I don't know.
did
I think
you-
I just
biological.
made it up. Yeah.
That's
So
not, it's biological.
Is it?
If you-
Don't know
if
where
you
I
look
got
at
it from.
2 weeks. So
I don't know if it's 2 weeks.
I think we say it with depression. Actually, I think the mark is if someone is depressed, not to rush off to give medication or anything. If after 2 weeks it seems to be getting worse, then one thinks about doing something else.
I know I work at 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, if the person is still hyper vigilant at 6 weeks, that's when it becomes pathological. That's when you start the trauma counselling. Because they've got this high rate of
adrenaline.
and it's
And it won't go
what's the
down.
word for it? It's a word for it. I can't remember. Do that peak. There's that period of
Cortisol.
The
Amygdala
cortisol,
hijack?
but it's the high. Anyway, there's a period where you're anxious and you're
Amygdala hijack.
and after 6 weeks, if it doesn't start coming down, that's when you start the therapy.
Right. Okay.
That's when it becomes that
I think
adaptive.
that's a reasonable amount of time. 2 weeks is not very
Sorry,
long.
can we just?
But it depends on the modalities. It depends on.
Depends on the person as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, there is a time limit where one actually has to. You can see, as I say, something like severe symptoms should be diminishing after 2 weeks. You might still have some, but you should start leaving the house then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think every experience is very different. Because I live around 5 minutes from the junction, and I feel like I can go around and back, but I still can't go, for example, back to the Lint Cafe.
Yeah.
And I knew my mum and I knew Rory, who actually, I don't know if any of you guys remember from the terrorist attack with the ISIS. He threw himself to safeguard the people, and he died. I can't set foot still in the Lint Cafe in the city. I don't know if I can feel his spirit or something around, and but I somehow can manage the junction. Maybe it's very early, or I don't know. Every
Because you
situation.
hear Rory.
Yeah, it could be. It could be that. I can. Yeah. I mean, like, I still remember when I was, for example, September 11th. It's still etched in my brain. I can see myself standing on the staircase, thinking, "Is this a movie?" And it was not. I remember people saying, "Don't send anyone to Mariah. You know, we don't know if there's war going to break out." It was, it's amazing how things just get etched in your brain. Some things do,
Yeah,
and then
that's
you
right.
visual,
That's
and
right.
some
And
things don't.
That's true. I mean, they say it's linked to emotions. I'll just finish by saying this, that there is also a concept called post-traumatic growth. And what's interesting is, I don't know why it's not, even Banana mentions he doesn't know why more people don't talk about it, which is what I was saying, that not only can most and will most of us be okay over time, doing all the things we're speaking about, but also we can actually, like Egos talks about, we can come out better and stronger. And that's what you want to aim for. And that's the other thing. When I say that, I don't believe, things like birth and death, we should never recover from them. Similarly, I think that we have many, many precedents in the Jewish world where we've come out stronger. It's horrible to live through it. And again, I'm not minimizing. And again, we never wanted or choose it. But it's not the first time we fought wars. And each time, even in our lifetime, we've seen the Israelis, for example, come out stronger. So it's just to really go out with an inner trust that even though it's so difficult right now, it's possible to come out the other side, and it's possible to come out stronger. And I hope when we're all 92 on the beach, we can look back and go, not only did we survive, now we wouldn't be the people we are now.
Just to add to that, my daughter was in the terrorist attack in Tel Aviv, the Sarona terrorist attack, all those about 7 years ago. She was a volunteer at Magen David Adom, and she was going on to shift. It was 10 o'clock at night. She was meeting her mates, sitting in the Max Brenner coffee shop, and with her mates, and in her bag was her MDA uniform, because she was going on shift at 11 p.m. And the terrorists came in, and their chair was like here, so they came in front of her and shot like that, right? So she was behind. So obviously, thank God, she wasn't involved in the firing.
Right.
And all of them obviously got up screaming, running, and they just dispersed, and they ran into buildings, into people's apartments, and etc. And one of her friends said to her, "Hang on, aren't you MDA?" So she goes, "Yes, I am." She says, "Well, aren't you supposed to be at shift?" She said, "I am." Takes out a bag, puts on her shirt, runs downstairs, and starts helping the Magen David Adom, and became so involved in the after effect that she actually got mastery over her trauma. She got power back.
That's right.
And it was unbelievable, and I'm telling you, it was the most traumatic. I mean, I don't know, I'd be a basket case, but she thrived because why she thrived is she got masterful over it. She also thrived because she became a bit of a talker for MDA, went around the country talking about her experiences. So that repetition of the story became that distant. Became a story.
Well, that's a great example to end with, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Find where you, the soldier, what you can do, and always look for ways where you can feel empowered rather than avoid and be afraid. And they say, what do they say about brave soldiers? They say, tremble but move forward. So I wish you all strength, and we should all just be here for each other. And thank you for coming tonight, and thanks for organising.
I'll just end off by saying thank you to Renee for donating your time.
And who's that?
Doesn't matter. That's the point.
No. So I come to listen to her talk.
Who's her?
This woman.
Who's this woman?
She's a groupie.
No. Do you know what a groupie is?
One person that likes to hang around with a lot of people.
No, it's when someone follows like a band, and they always go wherever the band goes.
Oh, okay, right.
So she says she's my groupie. Whenever I talk, she's there.
Which is that? You don't know what to tell me.
But anyway, that wasn't the point of my story. The point of my story is that I think it's a compliment when people keep coming to hear you.
It's the best compliment you can get.
That one girl, I know her face, but I couldn't work out who she is.
That other girl always comes to listen to you.
Which one?
I don't know what her name is. She stays there, I think, in... but in the same street as Rabbi Rona, but a bit further down. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.
Is Rabbi Rona?
Rabbi Rona. That guy, you've been to his office with me.
Peter Rona?
Peter.
I didn't know he's a rabbi.
Sure, a long time.
Never heard him being called Rabbi Rona. I know he's an accountant.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. There was Robin Burnitz and Cecil Zinn's wife, Gail, and Leanne Robinson, and
Robinson, that's it.
Sheila Lazarus. She lives in Bellevue Hill.
Oh, sorry, I made a mistake there. But her name's Robinson, her Dr. Robinson is
That's
a,
right, yeah.
yeah.
But Liz, you can't come and be so disruptive. I'm sorry.
What was I doing disruptive?
Your phone goes off, you're eating biscuits,
Oh,
you're
it's my
walking
fault.
around. It's your fault, 100%. No one else's
Okay,
phone
I
went off.
won't come anymore.
You come and you stand at the top and look at everybody. Why can't you just sit at the table like everybody else? Very distracting for me. You come and stand at the top there. That's not the protocol. Everyone else is sitting at the table. If you're a guest, sit at the table.
Okay. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much.
Enjoy yourself. We've got keys to get back in.
Yes, I've got keys.
Okay.
Good, very good this year. See you later.
Okay.